Underdogs. They're the unlikely heroes. Counted out. Given no chance to win. But the playbook flips when God's involved. That's how shepherds take down giants. You see, when God steps in, the odds change. The weak become strong. The meek become mighty. And the lowly become legends.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. Really good to see you. It's good to be back with you. My name's Jeremy. I'm one of the pastors here at NorthPoint. And I told you last week we had a really refreshing time away. We did a sabbatical. We were gone for a while and just had a wonderful time. It was amazing. Since May, the middle of May, we have been in Greece, Turkey, Indiana, Illinois, Colorado, and Michelle also went to Nashville with some of our girls. So it's been really good to be away, but there's no place like home. So it's good to be back and to sleep in your own bed and to have stability and to see your beautiful faces and to be with you. So I do want to say this, I'm super thankful for John and Katie, for Jay, for Kent, for Jason as well, for teaching in this Underdog series we've been doing. They just did a great job, and we just give them a hand and thank them, just encourage them. I appreciate each of them very much. And I'm going to continue this series today. So if you got a Bible, take it and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18, if you would. It's on page 228. Now, I got to tell you, when this series was designed, and for me, when I think about underdogs, my mind goes to a backyard swing set with my daughters at 4 years of age saying, again, to, and you can say it with me, go ahead. To underdog, right? The underdog. We even had a thing that we would say, because you would do the underdog, and then as a parent, you're on the other side of them. So we called this like an overdog or something. I don't know. We'd say overdog, and then we push their feet, which is a little bit more dangerous because they can almost flip off face first, the other side. But anyways, we just do fun things like that, right? So that's what I think of. When my wife, though, thinks about underdog, who do you think she thinks of? Rocky, right? Rocky. Do you know Michelle at all? You know Michelle. I've told you this. She is a huge Rocky fan. In fact, for Mother's Day this year, this was her Mother's Day present. Do you see the Rocky movie poster there? That's what she got for Mother's Day, and you know what? She wanted it. It's amazing to have a wife who is I need a Rocky movie poster for Mother's Day. And she loved it. She thought that was a great gift. That's all of the females in my family, including the two furry ones down there. So there's the car crew. Well, Rocky is the kind of underdog that we've been talking about in this series, but our underdog today is named David. And like Rocky, David went through a lot of stuff, a lot of difficult stuff in his life. And so today, let's talk about what to do when we deal with the hard stuff of life. We all have these times. Maybe you're in one of those times right now, or maybe for you that time is coming. Living in a fallen world with sinful people means that we're going to deal with our fair amount of difficult circumstances and difficult people that we're going to face. There's difficult things that happen. Our bodies may begin to give out. Our minds sometimes give out. You may be treated unfairly. And you add on to all of those sort of things that are coming at you from this world, you add your own sinfulness, right? Like your own struggles, your own things that you wrestle with, the fears that you have, the worry that you have. The fact that for some of you, you're just a complainer. You're a whiner, right? And it's just in your heart to be critical all the time. And the glass is always half empty. No matter if it's completely full, there's something wrong with it. And so you wrestle with that sort of complaining spirit inside of you because of your own sinfulness. There's some who struggle deeply with lust. You put all of these things together, the world we live in, the people, and our own hearts, and we're going to deal with some tough stuff in life. What do you have going on right now? Could you think about your own life for a moment and think, what do I have going on? Or maybe what do you anticipate coming into your life? For some of you, again, it could be physical issues. I know for some of you, you ask this question, will I always feel this way? Is this thing that I'm facing, that I've begun to face, that my body's begun to do, is it always going to be like this, or am I ever going to go back to normal, or is it just going to be this way? What is normal? For some of you, it's this question, why can't I sleep? I think if I could just sleep, I would feel a little bit more holistically better in my mind and my body, but I can't sleep and I can't figure out why I can't sleep, and I keep waking up. Some of you are dealing with that. For some of you, it's mental struggles. You really struggle with anxiety or with depression. For others, it's circumstances. There may be things that are coming at you that are very disappointing in your life or difficult to deal with. For some of you, it might be in the financial realm, financial hardships. Sometimes we have these times in our lives where it's like when it rains, it pours. It's not just like one thing happens, and if this one thing happened, I could handle it. But like I need a car repair. I also got in an accident. My fridge stopped working, and I just got my homeowner's insurance bill. Have any of you got your new homeowner's insurance bill? You don't want to get that, right? Like there's just, and I could do one, but I don't know if I can handle all of these things happening to me. For others, it's relationships with your kids, with your parents, with your spouse, or some relationship that is broken and doesn't seem like it can be restored. And then just the sin struggles, like I mentioned. An addiction or a mind battle. Or for some of you, you can't slow down. You can't stop working, and you know it's not exactly right, and you need to find some more balance and some Sabbath in your life, but you won't do it, and you can't do it, and you can't figure out how to get ahead of that thing. Whatever the thing is, life being tough has many different forms, and often a number of these things sort of collide, and they sort of come together in just a ball of toughness that we face in our lives. How do we prepare for that? How do you get yourselves ready to handle those tough circumstances, or how do you handle the ones that you are in right now? That's what David wants to help us with today, from the tough stuff that he faced. Let me catch us up with where David is at. And as I said in first service, I more so need to catch myself up because I haven't been here for this series. You have, so this is for my benefit, okay? Here's what's going on with David. He's a young, overlooked guy that is watching sheep, but God sees his heart, that David is looking to God. So even though outwardly David is not very impressive, he's not really in on the action, he's not really accomplished at this point, he has the one thing that really matters. He has a heart for God. And so God says, that's what I'm looking for. David, you're gonna become the next king of Israel. When that happens, God's Spirit comes upon David. Because get this, God always gives us the power to do what he calls us to do. There's never an excuse for us, and there's never a sense in which God says, do this, and I want you to follow me and obey me, and we're like, I can't. No, God always gives us the power to do what he calls us to do. So he gives David his Spirit. At the same time, though, that God's Spirit comes upon David, his Spirit leaves Saul, who is the current king. Now, this doesn't bode well for Saul at all, because not only has Saul been disconnecting himself from God, disobeying God, and seeking to do things his own way, but now God has taken his spirit off of Saul, and he is judging Saul by sending Saul a harmful spirit that comes upon him. So Saul now is tormented mentally. If Saul was around in our day, we might say he's beginning to show signs of a mental disorder even. But it's suggested that music could maybe help him. Let's do some music therapy for Saul. So they look throughout the land to find the most skilled musician who could come in, who can play music for Saul. And who do they find but a little shepherd boy, David, who comes in with his guitar and he plays some rock and roll to soothe Saul's soul. And that's what he does. And as he plays, the harmful spirit leaves Saul and he feels some relief. It works. And so Saul actually at this point loves David, because David is the only one who can help Saul with what he's got going on. Now, at this point, Saul doesn't know that David is the next in line to be king, so there's no reason for jealousy there. Saul doesn't know that that's going on. But then David kills the giant Goliath, and everyone else in Israel also begins to love David. Jonathan, one of Saul's sons, and David become BFFs. Saul's younger daughter, Michal, falls in love with David, and she's like, David put a ring on it. Let's do this thing. She wants to marry him. And so things for David are going absolutely great. David is in sync with God. God's blessed him. Life looks really good for him. And then a song changes everything. We saw the song last week, but as the army returns from this campaign against the Philistines, the one where David killed the giant Goliath, the city is rejoicing. Everybody is celebrating. It's like a hero's welcome. And you've maybe seen this in movies before where people return from war and there's dancing and there's singing in the streets and they're throwing flowers out among the heroes as they come back in. That happens for David and all the army. And here is what the women sing in 1 Samuel 18, verse 7. Saul has slain his thousands. That's good. Like if you were a warrior and people were singing a song about you and they said, you've slain thousands, you'd be like, yeah, look at me, I feel pretty good. But it's the next line that causes Saul trouble, and David his tens of thousands. This ticks Saul off. Verse 8, Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? Man, it's whining, right? Like he's jealous, he's upset, it's frustrating. Saul is childish, but he's still the king. This is a problem. Immaturity and authority is not a good match. Someone receiving power too quickly, getting a platform too quickly, being given influence and authority over people when they don't have the integrity to be able to sustain them in the midst of the influence and the power that they have, it's a recipe for disaster. This kind of thing is actually happening all the time in our social media world today. People with platforms and with influence who have no integrity to back it up, right? And it happens, unfortunately, it's happened in the Christian realm. In Christian, broader Christianity circles, that happens there as well. An audience and influence without integrity. That's Saul. It's like letting a toddler run the nursery. Like, could you imagine, many of you have had babies here at NorthPoint. Well done, good and faithful servants. There's been lots of babies that have been born here at NorthPoint recently. That's awesome. So imagine those of you that had a baby, your baby gets to 2 months old and you come to church and you're like, okay, I'm gonna drop my kid off at the nursery. And as you come to bring your baby into the nursery, all you see is like a 3-year-old checking the babies in. And you sneak a peek into the rooms, the glass windows that are there, and you're like, all I see is like 3 and 4-year-olds like in those rooms. They got like name tags, they're like in the charge of this. Is that how we run things around here? And we're like, yes, we want to let young eagles fly. We want to give responsibility. We want to hold on to power. We want to let these kids learn how to lead others. And you'd be like, I'm leaving. This is ridiculous. What are we living here? This is bizarro world, right? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And of course, that would never happen. You would leave. Well, how about letting a child run the entire country? That's Saul. That's what's happening and taking place. He's trying to run the country and he has no integrity, he has no maturity, he has no sense about him about how I actually lead in a good way. Now listen, this is a good reminder for those of you that are younger. It's a good reminder for those that are older as well. It is natural, especially when we're young, to want influence, to want to climb the ladder, to want positions, to want titles, to want authority, to want to raise ourselves up in the ranks. Of course we want that. But listen to me carefully. The worst possible thing that could happen to you is that you get those positions without the maturity to handle it well, without the integrity you need to sustain yourself. If you don't have the integrity and the maturity to sustain that, you will fall and you'll take a lot of other people down with you. We need the wisdom. We need the wisdom to help us see that God has given me this position and this influence, not just for my own benefit. Sure, I hope I can be successful, but he's given me these things to serve other people, to care for my community, and to serve others. So be patient. Focus on faithfulness and humility and integrity, and God will open the doors for you in good time. Well, back to David. David didn't know it yet, but his wonderful life up to this point was about to take a very rough turn after this song. The rest of chapter 18 and 19 tells the story of David walking with God and God being with David as Saul attempts to kill him at least 8 times. So, talk about life getting tough. I've had some rough days. I've had some rough weeks. I've actually had some years I would like to forget. Anybody else testify? You've had some years, you're like, let's just wipe out that year. Maybe 2020 is that year for a number of people, but there's other years that it's like, could we just wipe out that year? But I've never had someone repeatedly try to kill me. And I imagine that's true for most of you here. I was the victim of a hit and run one time in downtown Des Moines where I got sideswiped, I got thrown up on the curb almost into a retaining wall, and then the guy just backed up and got on the interstate before that. That shook me a bit. When I was a teenager, one time I was in Chicago and I stepped out in front of a car, but that was accidental and the guy swerved and that was a little bit traumatic. I have 3 teenage drivers, so there's that too that got going on, but it's like, these aren't like somebody purposefully trying to kill you. I'm not scared of going to my house and there's an axe murderer that's hiding in the closet somewhere, like I'm living a Scream movie or something like that. And I imagine that's true for all of you that are here as well. But this is what David has to deal with on a regular basis. I want to look briefly at these assassination attempts that Saul has against David. And what we're going to see is this. We're going to see 3 things. We're going to tell you what they are and then we'll come back to them at the end. First, you're going to see this. Life is tough sometimes. David shows us that life is tough sometimes. The Christian life is tough. Following God is tough. It's not always easy. And so we have to move from being surprised by it or thinking, woe is me, I can't believe this is happening to me. God, I don't deserve this. Why is this happening to me? We just got to move beyond that. We got to move through that. I mean, if you feel that way, take that to God, but you got to learn to mature through that and say, you know what? It's going to happen. Hard things are going to happen in life. We expect some difficulty. And in fact, what you come to find out as you mature is that those difficult things are absolutely necessary for your maturity. If you're going to grow into an adult that follows Jesus, you're going to have to deal with some hard things, and God's going to work through this. This is why Peter says to us in 1 Peter chapter 4, he says, beloved. Now, pause for a second, because that first word's really important. Peter says, those who are loved by God. Those of you who are seen by God, known by God, loved by the God of the universe, you who are loved by God, don't be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Wait a minute. Those who are loved by God face trials? Yeah, fiery, difficult, hard trials, apparently. Why do you got to add that word in there? It could just be trial. It could be fiery, terrible, horrible trials. Those loved by God face those things? Yes. And don't think something strange and out of the ordinary is happening to you. It's the way God works. So it is going to happen. The health scare, the unexpected death, the frustration, a job change, a move, a falling out with someone, disappointments. Following Jesus is not a promise of comfort all of the time. But secondly, you got to realize this, God is always in control. Life is tough sometimes, but God is always in control, especially in the craziness, especially in the hard stuff. We have to have this perspective that when things feel out of control in our life, they're not out of control. You might feel that, and those feelings you have are absolutely legitimate feelings that you got to deal with, but even though you feel that way, that's not necessarily what is true, because God is not freaking out or unaware of what's taking place in our lives. He knows, He sees, and we are beloved by the God that allows those things to take place. He's in control. And thirdly, we'll see this. When we look to Him, He brings victory. Life is tough, but God is always in control. And when you look to Him, He will bring you victory. He works through the chaos. He works through the hard stuff. You know how I know He works through the hard stuff? Because with David, He works through assassination attempts. It doesn't get much bigger than that. He works through assassination attempts to bring about our good. For a long time, I've been struck by this quote from Charles Spurgeon. Spurgeon was a famous British preacher. And it reminds me that God is always working. It helps me with the way that God works, that we need the maturity and the integrity that difficult things bring into our lives if we're going to have influence and authority and really even power, in a sense, in this life, spiritual power. Spurgeon said this, whenever God means to make a man great, He always breaks him in pieces first. And you could substitute woman in there as well. Whenever God means to make a person great, He always breaks them in pieces first. I didn't say you were going to like the quote. I don't really like the quote either, but it rings true. And it is true. I don't read that and I think, okay, sign me up. I want this. But look, this is how God works. It's how He is working right now. And maybe you could think about it this way. If you've ever had to follow or you have ever been under a leader that is arrogant, that is proud, that has had life handed to them on a silver platter, that seems like they've never had to handle anything hard in life. Life's always come to them easy. Life has always been good, and they're full of themselves because of it. You know how difficult that is for every single person that follows that leader. An unbroken leader is absolutely toxic, but a leader that has suffered, a leader that has endured those things, and a leader that has learned humility and compassion through the difficulties that they have suffered, well, you can follow that person, right? You want to follow that person. Look, this is how God makes us. He makes us by allowing these things into our lives, but by being with us and in control in the midst of the breaking and the pain. This is what we see from David as Saul tries to kill him again and again. Let's run through these quickly. First, we have David doing his guitar thing for Saul in Saul's court to help with his mental condition. When Saul goes nuts and throws a spear at David, Two times he tries to pin him to the wall. Next, that doesn't work, so Saul uses two of his daughters to try and kill David. He thinks, well, if I can't kill him by throwing the spear at him, I'll devise a plan for him to get killed. So remember how David was supposed to receive one of Saul's daughters as a wife because he slayed the giant? That was one of Saul's promises for whoever killed Goliath. Well, there was still this issue of the dowry or the bride price at this time that needed to be paid by David. And so Saul tells David, go fight the Philistines, fight these battles, and I'll give you Merab, one of my older daughters, hoping that the Philistines would get lucky and that they would knock David off. You see that in verse 17 of chapter 18. It says this. It says, Saul said to David, here's my older daughter, Merab. I'll give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely, fight the battles of the Lord. For Saul said to himself, I won't raise a hand against him, but let the Philistines do it. Well, this doesn't work. David fights the Philistines, he doesn't die, but Saul ends up still giving Merab to another man. But another daughter of Saul, Michal, loves David. Now, fun fact that has absolutely nothing to do with this message. Okay, growing up, before I was married, I love this story. I always loved the name Michal, David's first wife that he had. And I was like, one day when I grow up, if God allows me to have kids and I have daughters, I'm going to have a daughter and I'm going to name her Michal. But when you marry a woman whose name is Michelle, who mistakenly got called Michael because somebody in the hospital thought she was a boy, you don't get to name your daughter Michal. So as you notice, I don't have any Michals. Even though it's a biblical name, it means who is like God. It's from the Bible. It's David's first wife. I'm not bitter about it at all, but I've gotten over it. No, I actually am. I'm over it. I'm over it, right? But she's like, no, I'm standing by that. You ain't ever naming. Okay, so anyways, so here's the deal. Saul tells David that he can marry Michal if he kills 100 Philistines. And David is like, okay, I can do that. Saul's still thinking that David will go do this and he can't possibly kill 100 Philistines. They're going to get him in the process. Look at the end of verse 25. We read this. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines, still trying to get him. David comes back after not killing 100. He actually kills 200 Philistines. He doubles the dowry and Saul is once again thwarted. And the summary of it is this in verse 28. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. This is amazing. Saul is trying to kill David and all of his plans backfire on him, which is the classic Genesis 50 verse 20. You planned evil against me, but God planned it for good. Do you remember, anybody know what this story comes from in Genesis 50? This is actually Joseph's story. Joseph is this guy in the Old Testament who had a bunch of brothers, and Joseph was the favorite son of his father, which wasn't exactly right, but it made the rest of his brothers jealous. And so the rest of his brothers, they so despised Joseph that they said, we're going to kill him. We're going to kill him. We're going to get rid of this guy. One of the brothers talked them into not killing him, but selling him into slavery. So Joseph gets sold into slavery into Egypt. He goes into Egypt after being abandoned by his brothers who wanted to kill him. He gets to a foreign land away from all of his family. His father thinks that he is dead, and he ends up doing a little bit better there. But eventually he's falsely accused. He's put in prison. He stays there for a long time, but after a number of years, God works the circumstances, and Joseph is able to rise to the second in command in all of Egypt. So much so that when a famine breaks out and the rest of Joseph's family is desperate because of the famine has happened, they come to Egypt and they stand before Joseph, who's now second in command, and they think, oh no, he's gonna get revenge upon us for what we did to him. And this is what Joseph says to them. You planned evil against me, and you know what? It was evil. It was wrong, and it was terrible, and it was hard, and it was difficult, but God planned it. God was working in the midst of all of those things for good to bring about this result so that the family might be saved. You planned evil against me, God planned it for good. Or Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God. Or maybe better, God works all things together for the good of those who love him. Right? We have to believe this because we don't get it sometimes. You don't know why the thing is happening. You may never get the answer to why God allowed this thing or why people are acting a certain way or why it's so hard or so difficult. Losing a family member, going through a breakup, having to move, being diagnosed with a disease, someone causing me pain and bringing opposition, just being disappointed by life, struggling in your marriage or with your kids, it is hard to see why. But we believe that God is in control and that he works all things together for good for those who love him, for those who are connected to him, for those who are looking to him. We don't see why now, but we have always seen God work. And David knows this, which was really good because this wasn't the end for him. It's about to get harder for him. Saul, after this, becomes a lot less subtle, and he just straight up tries to convince his son Jonathan and some others to kill David. Look at this in chapter 19 and verse 1. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. We're past subtleties now. Like, let's just kind of devise this plan and see if maybe Philistine's going to just kill him. I want you to kill him, Jonathan. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David, and he warned David, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I'll go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you, and will tell you what I find out. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, don't let the king do wrong to his servant David. He hasn't wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life into his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel. You saw it, you were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? So Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. But how much can you trust the word of a child, right? And so Saul says, okay, I relent. David can come back into the court. It's going to be okay. I won't kill him. But he has a very short memory. And a little while later, when David comes back into the court, he's right back at it. He throws another spear at David when David comes back into the court during the music therapy session, and David escapes. And now David's on to something. He's like, I think something's going on here. Now, we might look at this story and be like, David, bro, you should have known this like way before this, that Saul is trying to kill you. But look, we've got this sort of perspective from the narrator when all of the story is done. David didn't have the perspective we have right now hearing the story. I mean, David is serving a king. He's in the king's court. There's been plenty of maniacal, egotistical, struggling kings that have a lot of pressure upon them, right? And so David doesn't exactly know what's taking place. Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe it's just a little bit tough for him right now. He's got a lot of pressures on him. But when Jonathan directly comes to him and says, my father is trying to kill you, and he comes back into the court and throws a spear at him again, David's like, I don't think he likes me. Like, I think he really wants me dead. And so David goes home to where Saul sends some hitmen to kill him in the morning. Michal, David's wife, alerts David, lets him out the back during the night. And so now we're up to 6 attempts on David's life, with even assassins being sent to his home to kill him. Again, can you imagine living in this state, wondering if a hitman is around every corner? You maybe played paintball before, or maybe laser tag, or maybe even back to your kid days, hide and go seek. Have you played hide and seek before? You know, when you play these games, there is a sense of like your senses are heightened, you're excited, you're anticipating, but you're also a little scared or nervous that you're about to get caught or you're about to get zipped by a paintball, which does not feel very good, but there's something thrilling but scary about it all at the same time. Well, imagine David not being scared by getting zipped by a paintball, but thinking there's an assassin waiting around every corner ready to stab me to death. That's what he's living in every moment of the day. And so David flees to Samuel, the prophet, for help. When David flees to Samuel, Saul quickly finds out where David is, and he sends messengers to get him. Now, the Hebrew word here is the word for messengers, but as you interpret the story, it's really military police or the guards of Saul that go to capture David and bring him back. But the word messenger is very interesting because when these messengers come to get him, God does something through his spirit to overtake their minds and their hearts. And he says, Saul, if you're going to send messengers to get David, I'll turn them into messengers. And through his spirit, he allows them to what the Bible says is to prophesy. We don't know exactly what they were prophesying, but they were speaking truth from God. God's like, I'll make these guys real messengers. And so when they come to get David, they either forget what they were there to do or they don't care anymore because God's spirit come upon them and they become messengers of God's truth and they leave David alone. Well, Saul's not content with this. He's like, these guys are ruining things. So he sends another group of messengers, same thing happens. He sends another group of messengers, the same thing happens. And then he does, he pulls the if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself card. And so he's like, I'm going by myself. Saul himself comes to get David in the city he's at. And when Saul comes to get David, a similar thing happens, but even worse. God's Spirit comes upon David, and the story tells us, this is what it says, he strips off all of his clothes and he lays naked on the ground for a whole day and a whole night, completely humiliating himself before all of the people. And God is saying to Saul, give it up. I'm in control. Saul, when will you realize that I am in control and I am with David and he will be victorious? This is Proverbs 21:1. A king's heart is like streams of water in the Lord's hand. He directs it wherever he chooses. Remember this, church. You know that this is true. I mean, there are rulers and leaders and world powers and dictators in our world, and God can move their hearts however, whenever he wants to move them. He's always done this. Now, depending on how we count these attempts, we're up to about 8 murder attempts over a period of months, if not years. If you're David, you might be rethinking the king thing. Like, this sounded like a good idea when you anointed me with that oil and you said, I'm gonna be the king. Yeah, this looks great. But now that Saul is trying to kill me repeatedly, I'll go back to watching sheep. This is tough. But each time God delivers David because he is with him and David is with God. They are connected. And so in the midst of the hard circumstances, God brings victory every single time. What do we learn from these instances in David's life? What do we learn for ourselves when life gets tough? The first thing we remember is this, that we should expect it. We just have to expect some tough stuff. Get this, David is anointed by God. He is chosen by God. He is loved by God. He has promised the kingdom. But all of those promises do not equal ease and comfort. Did you notice that? What all of those promises, being chosen, being blessed, being loved by God, equal is God's presence in the midst of the tough things. That God is with him. If he will keep looking to God, that God will be with him and take care of him in his trouble. Look, hard times are going to come. You have to expect it. Know that it's just built into the human experience. And know that God is always using it to teach us and to grow us and to mature us for what is next. Expect some tough stuff. But secondly, David shows us this. We've got to trust that God is in control. We trust in the midst of the tough stuff that God is in control. When people disappoint us, when our time demands seem unbearable, when your health fails, you need a rock. You need a rock to turn to. You need stability that is bigger and greater and more powerful and stronger than yourself or your own feelings or your own emotions or your own circumstances. You need a God who is in control. Unfortunately, our God knows, and he wants to help us. This truth has sustained Michelle and I through the tough times that we have faced. I've shared a little bit of this before, but our first few months of marriage, we've been married now for 23 years. But if you would have seen us in our first, let's say 5-6 months of marriage, you'd have been like, I'm not giving them much of a chance. I don't know if they're gonna make it. We met in Iowa, we got married here, we moved halfway across the country away from all of our family. And the primary reason for why our marriage was difficult at the beginning, I'm just gonna be honest with you, sorry to tell this about your pastor, I was a jerk. That's why our marriage was not very good. We move away from the country, we move away from our family. We have no money. We lived at first off of, Michelle worked 30 hours a week at a minimum wage job, and I was a graduate assistant, and that's what we lived off of. We didn't even know how we were gonna buy food and groceries. One time, I didn't share this in first service, one time I went to Burger King and I bought a $1 double cheeseburger, and she was ticked off. We had a major fight because I spent $1 at Burger King because we didn't have any money. So this is all the stress we're living with. Are we gonna make it? Are we gonna do this or not? She's like, I wanna go back home to my family. I wanna get out of here. And God worked through that over time, but that was a difficult season of our lives. You know now that we have 5 children, 5 beautiful daughters that God's given us. We're so grateful for them, but you know how our first pregnancy ended? In a miscarriage. So now you can look at our life, be like, God's blessed you, have all these kids, you have this big family that you wanted, but we didn't know that that's what it was gonna be. And when your first pregnancy is a miscarriage, like a number of you have faced, you don't know what the future looks like. And God, how are you gonna work through this? Is this gonna happen or not? And we've gotta yield to you in this. I've shared with you about Michelle's health struggles before, coming up on a year since my mom passed away, who I was very close to. I'm not telling you all these things about myself so that you can say, oh, poor Jeremy, and give sympathy. If you wanna give sympathy, great. But It's more to say to you like, I'm a pastor following Jesus, seeking to love you and shepherd you, and my life isn't easy. It doesn't equal comfort. It doesn't equal ease. And in fact, these are the very things that God uses in our lives to grow us and to change us and help us be what he wants us to be. Through all of these things that have happened and take place in our lives and the deep difficulties, whether they were from our own sin or from circumstances happening around us, one thing that Michelle and I have always held on to, God is on his throne. I might not feel like he's good right now. I might not feel like he's in control, but I actually know that he is in control. He has said, I will never leave you. Jesus said, I will never forsake you. And we want to trust that. And what I'm telling you today is you need to have this settled before the hard times come. Prepare yourself to know this truth, to believe this truth, to trust this truth about God. It will be tested for sure in difficult times. It's not like you decide this one, God's in control, I'm good to go for the rest of my life. No, it will be tested. You will be tried, and you might have to come to Jesus and say, okay, I believe, I think I believe, help my unbelief, right? You might have to do that, and he's good with that. You can come to him that way. He's that gracious. It'll be challenged for sure, but believe and trust that God is in control, which leads to our last thing from David. Trusting that God is in control and that he is working for our good in the midst of difficulty comes from looking to him. It comes from looking to him, and looking to him not just in the hard times, but on the daily relationship with him. Look, this is really the big point of chapters 18 and 19. If I could just point it out to you briefly here, I want you to see what the main point of this whole story is. Chapter 18 and verse 12, first of all, says this: Saul was afraid of David because why? The Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. Verse 14, in everything David did, he had great success. Why, David, did you have great success? Because the Lord was with him. Verse 28, when Saul realized that the Lord was with David, then he was fearful. David is successful because God is with him. Even running for his life and probably wondering why it is all going down like this, probably wondering why God said, you're gonna be the king and I gotta wait like almost 2 decades until I actually become the king. God is with him, and he is with God. And this is where David's strength and deliverance come from. It's where his perspective that God is in control comes from. It's all from this daily relationship with God. You know, sometimes you and I, we think this way, and I've thought this way before. This just needs to end. This needs to be over. These terrible things need to be done. This absolutely has to change. God, change this now. I can't handle it anymore. Maybe that's true. Maybe the circumstances do need to change. But you know what you really need more than the circumstances to change? You need God in your now, in your struggle, because he's your strength. He's your deliverance and your hope. Regardless of whether circumstances quickly change or not, he can transform your heart and your attitude in the midst of what you're facing so that you change, so that you have peace, because that's exactly what he's seeking to do through the difficult thing you're going through. So it might get over a little bit more quickly if you yield to him and look to him in the midst of what's happening and taking place. What I just said a minute ago, I could say a little bit better. It's not so much that what you really need is God to be in your now, it's that God is in your now. You just need to realize it. We just need to live in that truth, to see him there. You know something that's really incredible that you and I have today that's different than David? There is something that is drastically different from David to you and to me. Something that we have that is way better than anything David ever had. See, David looked to God. David was with God, God was with David, but we have seen God in the person of Jesus Christ. David never knew the human God. He never knew Jesus Christ, who was with us, who is like us, who has actually dealt with pain and sorrow as a human being, a God who is acquainted with our griefs and our sorrows, and that God, Jesus, is with us right now. Do you know your relationship with God is better than what David ever experienced? He might have been anointed by God, he might have been the king of Israel, and you're in a better position than David ever was because you get to know Jesus. And he is the Jesus that we read this about in Hebrews chapter 4. We don't have a high priest, that's Jesus, who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. So let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Watch this real quick. Okay, Jesus, who is God, comes down to this earth. He lives a human life, all the temptations, all the struggles we face, and it says, yet he was without sin. Now, if you were God and you come down to earth and all these human beings have messed up the creation that you made, and you live a perfectly sinless life, you do everything that God wants you to do, when you get to the end of that, don't you think you look at the rest of these humans and be like, hey, losers, pick it up out there. Look at what I did. Why don't you guys follow along? Follow my example. Do what I did. Jesus doesn't say that to us. What does he say to us? I did what you couldn't do. I lived the life you couldn't live. I died the death you couldn't die. Not so I could condemn you and tell you you're a bunch of losers, but to say, come now, receive my grace. Because I did do what you couldn't do. And I want you to come for mercy and grace to help you in your time of need. That is our Savior. And David never quite experienced God like that, like you can through Jesus Christ. And then how about a final word very directly from Jesus Christ's own lips? He said this, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I don't give you peace like the world gives, so don't let your hearts be troubled. And my children, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There is grace for you in Jesus. There is peace for you in Jesus. Don't run away from him. Run towards him. Or for some of you, if you're like, I don't think I can run towards Jesus, can you walk? Can you limp? Can you just fall over? He'll take you. He'll take you whatever way you will come to him. He will receive you, and he will give you mercy and grace to help you there. What are you dealing with? What's coming into your life? Are you taking it to Jesus? Are you praying and reading his word so that you have the grace and the peace to deal with it? So that he can affirm you that you are his child and that you are loved by him. So you can see that he is in control and he is working even in ways we don't fully understand. You need that assurance. You need that hope. And it all comes through relationship with him. You know, if you want to get really practical on this, I know probably for many of you that have been around, some of you are newer to NorthPoint, but others of you that have been around for a while, you're like, we knew Jeremy's biggest point from his message when he comes back was going to be look to Jesus. That's what it always is. So you're kind of expecting that a little bit, probably to be like the main thing we're going to talk about. But maybe for some of you, you're like, okay, big picture, I get that, but like practically how? Like what does that look like? How do I do that? And so there's a book that I actually read on sabbatical recommended by some folks at the church that I want to encourage you to read. To answer the question, how, like on a daily basis, how do I have like practices or habits of growing in this relationship with Jesus? Like how do I look to him on a regular way? So this is a book by John Mark Comer called Practicing the Way. And if you want to take some steps, he's a great writer. It's not hard and difficult to read. It's challenging, but it's not difficult to read. I encourage you to pick up this book. I would tell you to go to our bookstore, but they sold out after first service. So we'll get some more for next week. Go to Amazon. You can get it, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. Because if you're like, how do I do this? How do I look to Jesus on a daily basis? This would be a great place for you to be able to start. Because Jesus is our place of grace and hope. Would you pray with me?